All righty, folks. Well, we are live. We've got the recording going. It looks like we've got all of our participants here. I see Doug. I see Julie. I know Vijay's on the line. So it looks like we got a full house this morning. So let's go ahead and get started. And good morning to you all. And welcome to this, the seventh week, the end of the seventh week of all of these Zoom video conferences that we have been working on with you all. My name is Bruce Cladney, Executive Director for the Kansas Association of Counties, and it's a pleasure to welcome you all this beautiful Friday morning. And so we've got a full house, we got a full agenda this morning. Real quick, let me wrap up from what we talked about on Wednesday for just a second and say thank you to those of you that had reached out to me after we wrapped up the Zoom. I had thrown out the request for you to share a couple of pieces of information with me. I asked that you go ahead and share with me any concerns or things that were not working with these webinars and things that were working. And I got several good responses back that I'll share with Doug and the rest of the recovery office folks in the future here shortly. And then I also had reached out and asked, give me, if you felt comfortable sharing with me any concerns that you had about getting all of your funds spent. And I have not had any response yet saying that you are not going to have everything spent. In fact, many of you said that this was probably all going to go and then some more. So if more happens to come down the line, you're going to have uses for it. So that's fantastic to hear that, because we were kind of concerned because we hadn't heard anything if things weren't working. So if you are one of those folks that did not reach out to me yet, I certainly would welcome you to do so on either of those two issues. Just send me an email real quick to my email address at Cladney at kansascounties.org. Also, a couple of things, as you well know, we're getting now ready to submit our plans and get those approved and start with the spending process. And so now I'm starting to see questions on the listserv about documentation and keeping track of all the expenditures and what sort of information needs to be kept track of. And I know that NACO, in fact, is hosting a meeting this afternoon at 2 o'clock about this very issue with the Treasury Department. So we'll get more information about that. And I know the Recovery Office is on top of that as well. And so in future meetings, I'm sure we'll be getting more information about what we need to be keeping track of and how it's going to get reported and so on and so forth. And you keep hearing me talk about the listserv. If you have not received anything on the listserv as of yet, that means either you have not sent me your name, your email address, and the county you live in or working in, and or we got that information and we don't have it in the system right or correctly. So if either of those two are the case, please don't hesitate to send me an email asking to be put onto the listserv. It's free, it's easy to use, and I see a lot of great information being exchanged there. So with that, folks, I'm not going to take up any more of our time this morning. I'm going to turn it over to the Recovery Office to do their great work for us here for the next hour or so. So Julie, Doug, Vijay, please take it away. Thank you.
All right. I'll start off. Bruce, thank you. And let's see, I can't tell, is the PowerPoint up? And there we go.
There we go.
There we go. All right, now we're cooking. So I want to start by saying, let's go on, Doug, whoever's driving. We'll get ourselves organized here. There we go. Okay, we can go on to the next slide, please. I'm Julie Lorenz, and I am Secretary of the Kansas Department of Transportation and also serving as Executive Director for the Office of Recovery. I like starting each of my presentations when I talk with people with a countdown. We currently have 138 days until December 30th, which we currently assume is our deadline for not just getting dollars out the door, but making sure that we're putting these dollars to work for Kansans to help with our recovery. So we're very cognizant of time. Next slide. And I often talk about, at KDOT, transportation is a team sport. And if that's the case, I would say recovery for our state is really a team sport. I appreciate the association hosting these webinars. I appreciate how hard all the counties are working and the cities and schools across the board, healthcare. I appreciate how we're all coming together to work on behalf of the citizens of Kansas. And I want to share some information that I've been talking with Legislative Budget Committee, State Finance Council, and both SPARK committees. And I want to share some of the information that we're sharing across the state. I also want to point out, and Doug Gerber's is on the webinar with us today. He is taking the lead role in terms of liaison with the counties from the Office of Recovery. We think it's just so important that we not just provide sort of that compliance role, but really, as you'll see this first bullet, that we're really facilitating information sharing and taking what's working maybe in one county and maybe another county can put a slightly different twist on it and make that practice work for them, so that we're leveraging our dollars, these investment ideas. And I asked the recovery office, we talk about this quite a bit. We at times get sort of frustrated with the evolving nature of the federal guidance. And then I am quick to remind recovery office that, yeah, not only do we get frustrated, but then that flows down to the counties in terms of changing guidance. So we're trying to communicate with you as quickly as we can as we learn changes. And I think there are several questions up in the air in terms of deadlines and flexibility. The Senate went home yesterday without passing another stimulus bill. So there's a lot of unknowns and people crave certainty. So we will provide information as quickly as we can, but we all know that there's a lot of uncertainty. We're just going to have to continue to work together. And certainly a third role of the Office of Recovery is to ensure compliance and making sure we keep these federal dollars in Kansas and working at their highest and best value. And we appreciate that you are evaluating really what's going on in each of your counties to make sure that the dollars are being used best in terms of sort of that local control approach. One thing that I ask each of you on the call today, and as you submit your plans in the next few days, we want to hear your good stories. We want to be able to share information across the state, given particularly this short time frame. Okay, next slide. So a quick overview of the CARES Act, sort of from the ground up. More than $10 billion has been invested in Kansas, about $5.9 billion for businesses and community organizations. Education has received about $200 million. Of that, $84 million went to K through 12. Healthcare, food, housing, and other sorts of essential services at $2.9 billion. And then the relief fund at $1.25 billion, and that's the fund over which the recovery office is responsible. So that helps put in context the overall dollars that are flowing into the state, and then out of the $10.5 billion, about $1.25 for relief funds. Okay, next slide. Now, let's break that 1.25 down a little more clearly. So you'll see the bar up there is at 1.034 billion. That's because both Sedgwick and Johnson County received direct allocations given the size of their population. So we were working from a pool, so to speak, of 1.034 billion. The round one that you all are most familiar with, the 400 million went directly to counties for administration. You'll see on the left of this chart, about 23 million went to state agencies for reimbursement. I'll talk a bit more about a consulting contract we were authorized for just this week in State Finance Council for up to 5 million, particularly to help us with the compliance and reporting side. And then about $2 million for the overall recovery office itself. In round two, which was approved last week by State Finance Council, and the connectivity or broadband piece was approved by State Finance Council on Monday, 314 million in round two, with particular emphasis on public health, education, economic development, and connectivity. Connectivity is also another name for broadband. Those funds are being dispersed now to state agencies, which will then administer those funds. The third round, we have about 290 million remaining for round three. And I think there are any number of factors that could influence that round three, including, as I've already talked about, will we receive additional flexibility? What might be the use for those funds? In terms of, for example, there was a presidential executive order issued over the weekend that relates to payments for unemployment. And also a question around flexibility, and will we receive additional funds for relief from the Congress? So those are all sorts of questions that we face as we head into round three. Now, in terms of the round 2 distribution, there were 23 programs I just mentioned at $314 million. Across the board, you can see some of those are application programs, some are direct transfers, and 2 are subcontract programs. I think the thing that I want to emphasize in this slide is that we are signing memorandums of agreement or understanding, MOUs, with each state agency for each of these programs. And as part of those MOUs, if funds cannot be dispersed through those programs, they'll be brought back for reallocation. So just as we're holding counties accountable for expenditure of funds, and Bruce, I was glad to hear that it sounds like everybody's going to be able to invest all of their funds, but we are holding agencies accountable just as we are the counties. Okay, next slide. This is where we have another ask for everyone today. This, the back to business aspect of economic development and connectivity grant applications are now available for you to look at the applications, and Commerce will begin accepting those applications on Wednesday, August 19th. Please go out, take a look at those applications, and share this information with all your contacts. We want as many businesses as possible to know that these grant applications are now available, and we will be taking submittals starting next Wednesday. Okay, next slide. Okay, I said we're trying to grow the recovery office staff so that we can provide better resources, better information for you. Glad to announce 4 hires as of this week: a finance director, Doug, who's on the phone with us for county outreach, and Doug has a really strong local government experience background. We couldn't be happier to have Doug join the team. A performance and accountability manager, as well as a public affairs liaison. They come to our team, which was currently comprised of 10 state employees. Many of us have been either temporarily assigned for sort of a 30 or 60-day window, or are working on a part-time basis for recovery. So we very much are glad to have 4 new folks join the team. In addition, we were authorized to seek consulting services for up to $5 million to particularly help us with accounting expertise and ensure compliance. In addition to that, we want to begin to provide better communication and resources in terms of sharing thoughts and programs that are working well across the state. And we'll be looking to the consultant to bring us ideas that are working in other states as well. So we're getting much stronger, more robust, so that we can do a better job for you all and for the citizens of Kansas. Next slide. So let's talk a little bit about the implementation process. This is my favorite slide in the entire deck. Whoops, not this one, the next. That's the one that's my favorite one. Okay, this identifies some of the really complexity and the factors that are out of our control. And as humans, I mean, the thing we crave, right, is sort of consistency or understanding the landscape. And that's what makes this process so difficult. So if you look back to June 8th, for example, caseload was down at about 76 in the state. People, I think, were breathing a little easier, thinking, all right, we're going to get perhaps this break before we have like the potential second wave in the fall. But then you can see caseload starts to go up. We see a peak over there on July 22nd. And so we start talking about a surge that might go just directly into the second wave. So now, as we think about the investments to make with our dollars, some are what I would consider to be response activities, like buying PPE or testing and tracing. Other investments, like broadband, provide benefits for longer term growth and economic development. And so if you see lower caseloads, you might be inclined to invest more on the long-term benefits. If you're seeing a spike, you might naturally be more inclined to spend more on the response side of the equation. So making decisions in a changing environment is tough. Added to that, then you see each of those little red boxes. That's when we got guidance updates from Treasury. So not only is our environment in terms of health changing, but so are actually the rules of the road, as you see there. So that's part of what we're all trying to manage as we try to make the best decisions about how to invest these funds. Okay, next slide. One of the first things that we did when I arrived at the Office of Recovery was to put together a series of slides that helps connect all the dots, if you will, across committee meetings, decision points, input points, and post that then against the days remaining. So we've identified what needs to complete it on a month-by-month basis. Staff would actually be thrilled if I'd please point out each and every time the draft in the bottom right of that corner. So you can only lay out a schedule that accounts for what you know at the time. And remember, a couple of slides ago, it shows changing guidance and everything else. So this is our best estimate today. And you can see we do red check marks on the far left as we complete our activities. This month, we identified our must-dos in blue to distribute some of those round 2 funds. And I'm glad to let you know we are signing MOAs all this week so that we can expend those funds. We need to get a consultant on board, and we're going to open applications for round 2. And I've already talked a bit about Commerce leading the way for next week, but we're working with our other sister agencies, and we know they'll be opening applications pretty darn soon. At the end of August, we'll have 121 days remaining. Okay, next slide. You'll see items identified here in terms of reporting, perhaps convening some listening sessions for our Spark committees, and those are always open meetings. But I think it's important that we start to think about some of the data and the emerging trends as we head into round 3 to help improve or better inform our decision making. That's one thing that I certainly take seriously as our responsibility from the Recovery Office. Our job at Recovery Office is not to make the decisions. Our job is to find the data and create the processes so that informed decisions can be made by others. You'll see items on there also related to counties sending in their reports, us taking a look at those, deciding how we can partner, provide better information with counties, if there's a reallocation process that's needed to begin to implement that. And also to start thinking about round 3 applications at the end of September. Quite frankly, if we can expedite that, I think that would be fantastic. Don't know if it's possible, but would very much like to be thinking about that. As we head into October, you'll see combined meetings for Spark, because we have both an executive committee and a steering committee, and we think bringing those committees together more often will give us the opportunity to better leverage their many talents and their input. By the time that we conclude October, we will make sure that we have contingency plans that have been developed should some funds not be able to be expended across rounds 1, 2, or potentially even 3. We'll have some things waiting in the background for which funds could be applied. I don't know exactly what those are, but we want to make sure we have contingency plans in place. Okay, November and December, ongoing reports of expenditures, calling meetings as needed, and implementing those contingency plans to avoid having to turn funds back. Final report being submitted to the State Finance Council and to Spark on January 20th. That assumes no extension of time, and that remains to be seen. Okay, next slide. I wanted to share a good example from Kiowa County that we heard to see if there are publication requirements for the plan. Certainly, your plan needs to be accessible, but more importantly, we encourage you and appreciated the thoughtfulness around the need for transparency. Anything you can do to help inform your county colleagues and your citizens is going to be helpful for people understanding how dollars are being expended, and for being able to think about if there are other ideas out there that would help you leverage those dollars. Certainly, so $400 million went to the counties. Currently, we've only categorized that as government spending. We know that's not accurate because we can't do a better job of mining that data until we see your plans. But we know funds are being expended for schools and for healthcare and for PPE. And we need to make sure that we are able to categorize that data so that we can understand best how the money is really being invested and what benefits collectively we're seeing from those investments. I'm really excited to see those plans come in so that we can have better information and can begin doing a better job of sharing information with all of you. Next slide. So I'm going to pause, and I don't know, Bruce, if questions come through you or how we run this, but Also, I'd be the first to say I'm not the technical expert on Vijay on the call. Happy to talk about the Spark process sorts of stuff, but if it's a question of, is this or that a legit expense, we probably ought to bounce that over to the real experts.
Right. No, Julie, I appreciate that. And Jay usually fields the calls, and we usually just get them through the chat. So the folks are really in tune to that and submitting their questions via chat. So we kind of just go through the chat and see if there's anything that's appropriate for you to answer. And so far, I don't see anything at this second.
Okay.
All of them are technical questions, it looks like.
Okay. I just very much want to say how much I appreciate Bruce has always been a good partner, and really all of us working together is critically important for recovery, particularly as we see the changing landscape. So we are working to improve at recovery and to strengthen and grow our numbers so we can be a better resource for you.
That's fantastic.
All right. Well, with that, I'm going to put myself on mute, and Bruce, we'll turn the show back over to you.
All right. Well, actually, it goes over to Vijay and Doug. So I think they are on the line as well, obviously, because they've been running the slides, and I think they're going to take it over from here. So, but thanks again, Julia, for everything. That was a fantastic wrap up and synopsis of where we are and where we're headed. So I appreciate that.
Sure. Thank you.
Hi, good morning, everybody. This is Vijay Ramasamy. I'm here with Doug Gerber. As Secretary Lorenz mentioned, we're really excited to have Doug on the team here. And today is kind of a ceremonial passing of the torch over to Doug as we work through the next step in our county process after a lot of our plans are being submitted and we start reviewing those and get money flowing into your communities. Right before we get into the updates, and I'll let Doug introduce himself in a second, I just wanted to give, again, a quick reiteration of the Department of Commerce programs. As Secretary Lorenz mentioned, the portal opened as of yesterday to just view the application. Next week, you'll be able to actually submit your applications. But again, if you have questions, you can definitely go to the backtobusiness@kas.gov email for questions. All counties are eligible to apply. And as Secretary Lorenz mentioned, this includes economic development and connectivity, and that's a total of $130 million in investment across a host of programs for food producers, for businesses, for attracting businesses to the state, for things like PPE development or testing development. And so we're really excited about that. And I know a lot of you have some technical questions about how those programs are working, but I would ask you to first look at that portal, look at the application. There's a lot of good information there. And if you have additional questions, you can definitely reach out to the Department of Commerce. The last thing that I'll say on this is that, like Secretary Lorenz mentioned, we want to get this out to as many people as possible, ensuring that businesses, big and small across the state, have access to these funds. And so you all are the best messengers to get it out to your communities. And so we appreciate your partnership in doing that. So the next executive and steering committee meeting is next week, August 19th at 10 a.m. And so you'll can definitely tune in there. That's an open meeting and see those materials for some additional updates. So let's get into the recovery office updates. I'm going to turn it over to Doug here. I mean, I've worked with Doug for a little under a week now, and I'm blown away, and I'm really excited about all of his experience that he's bringing to the table. And so let Doug take over, introduce himself, and do some recovery office updates.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Jay, appreciate the warm welcome, and Secretary Lorenz, thank you. I am glad to be on board. As I've looked through the names on this webinar, recognize a lot of you, and I'm excited to be working with you again on another capacity. As the Secretary noted, I do have some good local government experience, I think, having worked in Mitchell County for a number of years, in Beloit, and then in Sherman County also for a number of years, and finally I've been here in Shawnee County for the last 6.5 years. So I sort of understand your language and understand where you're coming from, and hope to be a good liaison in that way. And as we work towards, as the Secretary's stated many times, getting these dollars out, making sure they're spent wisely for your communities, and making sure that we have a strong Kansas recovery for all of us. These updates that you see here on the screen, I know Vijay went through these last time with you, so I won't belabor the point. probably much of what you want to talk about today has to do with the 815/817 guideline that you have for turning in your direct aid and reimbursement plans. So you're aware of that. We have, just by way of some numbers for you, we've provided nearly 400 emails, voicemails, and guidance interpretation responses. So Vijay has really, and his team have done yeoman's work here, just getting stuff out the door with a limited staff, and I'm pleased to be on board to help them hopefully get that process moving a little more quickly. We hope by the end of the day we'll have every single one of your emails and voicemails responded to, so that you're up to date going into this weekend. So in terms of some round 2 updates, on the beginning of this week, on Monday, the State Finance Council approved $60 million, as the Secretary noted, for investment in connectivity, state agency reimbursements, and then, as has been noted on here, up to $5 million for a consultant contract. We're excited about that. I think everybody on this call knows how these things work. We're anxious to be able to let you know who might be working with us, but those details aren't just available at this point, but we're going to get those out just as soon as possible, so we can all get on the same page with that. And then just to reiterate, the Spark and the steering and executive committee meetings are all online, and all those materials can be found at the covid.ks.gov website that we provide for you. These clarifications have come in over the past couple of weeks, so just want to run through a couple of those that seem to be prevalent across a number of your questions. And the one is, I'll just read it to you. If a state transfers fund payment to its political subdivisions, would the transferred funds count toward the subrecipient's total funding received from the federal government for the purposes of the Single Audit Act? Yes. Our interpretation of that is $750,000 or more, no matter what the source, in federal awards during that fiscal year would qualify. And we would suggest, we're not suggesting an amount, but we would suggest that you set aside some funds to help pay for those audit expenses. As always, we're looking for additional guidance and expecting some from the federal government on the ability to hold those funds beyond the end of this year for a federal audit. But we have posted that guidance on the covid.ks website. Some additional key clarifications. I'll reiterate one that the Secretary noted in her presentation, and that is related to transparency. We certainly want you to be open, accessible. This information needs to be accessible to folks, but there's no formal publication requirements. But we would encourage you to be transparent and to let folks in your communities know how these dollars are being spent. You all are used to that in your processes, to being open and transparent and receiving citizen input on how to spend dollars. So we would encourage you to continue that with this process. We posted a link here to the Department of Treasury PowerPoint on their last update. We don't have a link to the webinars, but as always, when we get additional guidance, we will post it as we become aware. And then the last key clarification, if grants to a small business count as taxable income for them, is there guidance on how to report this? In other words, use a 1099 or some other form. We're asking that you have a small business or tax consultant, have them consult with a tax advisor on the most appropriate way to report the income for their specific situation. We all know those situations may vary, and so as much as possible, we're going to let people work with the tax advisor to understand the implications of how that is reported. So this is day 5 for me, but I did sneak on a couple webinars last week, and I know that this has been mentioned last week as well as this week, but just want to reiterate it in a friendly way that as always, we're encouraging you to utilize resources like your county council and the FAQ to make county level determinations as much as possible for the eligibility of expenses. I know when I was in local government, we loved the ability to have localized decision making, and so we want to make sure that that philosophy is reflected in your decisions, and that to the greatest extent possible, you have that ability to make those interpretations and make those investments that are best for your community. The best way to start this thinking, of course, as you know, is to start with COVID-19 priorities and then determine what goods, programs, and services are needed to support those priorities. And again, just reiterate, we'll continue to communicate guidance as it comes in. You've seen this slide before, I think, from Vijay, and so again, we want to make sure that you are prioritizing community level investments. You can continue to provide reimbursements to institutions, even if they're eligible for state investments for other priorities. The rules on duplication of funds still apply. We've been getting that question fairly frequently, I would say, and you know, obviously it should go without saying, but we'll say it again, that no cost can be reimbursed twice. This chart you've seen, but again, it just throws out, it's a nice chart. I like it, and it lays out very well some ideas for county investments in terms of health, connectivity / broadband, economic development, and education. And as we've looked at some of the plans that have come in, I think that appears to be the areas of focus for your community, and I think that's a good thing for your community, and it's a good thing for Kansas. So thank you for doing that. Okay, so now I will quit blabbing for a little bit and turn it over to Jay and let him blab for a while.
I appreciate that. I think everyone's sick of my voice at this point, so. So I just wanted to reiterate some of the guidance that we went through on Wednesday as it relates to new federal guidance on 810 provided by the Department of Treasury. As we mentioned before, there's 4 additional questions. The link is there. Please read the questions in detail if you have additional questions about what specific things mean. But the first one is just a reiteration that you can use funds to satisfy non-federal matching requirements like the FEMA match. The second question specifically relates to taxable income as it relates to business grant programs. And so if you provide a business a grant, that is considered a part of that business as a gross taxable income. The next question relates to loans. And so if you provide a loan, unless you are forgiving a portion of the loan, that loan is not included in gross taxable income. However, the last question here is part of the reason why we have suggested and recommended that counties do grants instead of loans, because if you do provide a business a loan, even though largely it is not taxable, the entirety of the loan must be paid back by December 30th, and any interest gained from the loan or the costs that you've recouped because of that loan have to be used by December 30th. And so the timeline that we have so far is incredibly difficult for doing some sort of revolving loan program. And I'll just tell you anecdotally, the loan programs that we've done from the state level, it takes time for businesses to pay it back, especially when we have such economic hardship. And so that's the reason why we have really pushed counties to do grant programs instead of loans, because of the period of kind of the deadline period that we have of December 30th for getting those loans paid back and for that money to be used again. And so if you do a loan and they pay it back by December 30th, but you can't spend the money they gave you by December 30th, then you're going to have to return the funds. And so please take that into account as you're building your programs and submitting your direct aid forms. Next slide here is important because it illustrates what we're still waiting for as it relates to federal guidance. And like Secretary Lorenz mentioned, this is an evolving process, and we appreciate your partnership as we continue to take in federal guidance, analyze it, and provide you the best, most simple, direct information about what it means as it relates to your direct aid plans or reimbursement forms. We're still waiting for some additional information as it relates to what construction projects are allowed, if it can be a capital cost that can be built by December 30th. There's been some talk that only temporary facilities like a temporary testing facility are allowed, but we're still waiting for some more information on that. The big thing that I'll point out here is payroll costs. We have gotten information from multiple sources that there will be additional federal guidance as early as next week as it relates to payroll costs and maybe tightening up what can be allowed under payroll expenses. And so we don't know what that means and what that looks like, but we know that that means that it's maybe tightened up. And so we recommend taking a more conservative approach to payroll. I know some folks are thinking about crediting an entire agency towards CRF. I want to reiterate here that the employee themselves has to be substantially dedicated to COVID-19. And so they themselves have to be directly spending a majority of their hours in order to credit their entire salary towards mitigating responding to COVID-19. And so they've given examples of public health or human services that they themselves are specifically dedicated. It doesn't count if, because of the nature of their job, they're just dealing with COVID-19, because that could include everybody. And so making that distinction about a specific public health individual, an epidemiologist who's dedicated a majority of their hours to tracking COVID-19, that might be an allowable expense. And so as we wait for more federal guidance, we're just recommending that you be more conservative. And a way to do that is to focus instead on those community level investments, whether it be in childcare, broadband, what have you, in business grant programs that are really going to help you long term and will avoid needing to reclassify if we do get additional federal guidance. But as of right now, as we've always said, we operate with what we've been given. And so we just are making that clarification. The last thing, and I know Doug mentioned this and so did Secretary Lorenz, is that the U.S. Senate did adjourn on 8/13 and there's no additional action on the stimulus as of right now. We're expecting them to resume some talks maybe after Labor Day, but we know that the federal government operates on their own timeline and that those are always evolving talks. And so anything that you hear on the federal side, until it is law and signed into law, we are not going to act on it. And so we just wanted to let you know that that we probably won't expect anything until after Labor Day if it happens. And once they do give additional guidance, we will provide that to you and help work through what that means as it relates to your direct aid plans and your reimbursement reporting forms. The last couple of things, I know that you're still waiting on a separate reporting sheet for any expenses that you're going to incur beyond 8/1. We're still trying to provide that to you. As Secretary Lorenz mentioned, the consultants we're working to get those consultants on board. And once we have those, it'll be a little bit easier for us to get you a new sheet that can help you not only track your expenses as a county, but also track your programs like business grant program, for example, beyond 8/1, because the existing reporting spreadsheet that you have is from March 1st to July 31st. And so anything that you're spending that you've illustrated in your direct aid plan moving forward will come in a separate spreadsheet. And that spreadsheet will encompass a lot of the new reporting requirements from the federal government. As we mentioned before, that new guidance allows for, it requires states, to provide some additional information for any transfers, grants, direct payments above $50,000. And it also asks for some additional information as it relates to the status of a program or specific project information. And so our new reporting will include that. And additional support will be provided to you all as we roll those things out. And so we appreciate you all being patient for those. And again, that doesn't change anything that you submit for tomorrow or for Monday. Again, there's a grace period until Monday at 5 p.m. We'll go through in detail exactly what you're going to be submitting. I know a lot of you have already submitted your forms, but there's 2 spreadsheets that are due. One is the reimbursement reporting spreadsheet, and the other is the direct aid plan. And so those 2 are due on 8/15 or 8/17 at 5 p.m. And so I know a lot of you have submitted them so far, and we'll continue to get you some confirmation emails as we move forward. I know some of you have reached out to us and said, hey, I've gotten a confirmation email for my reimbursement form, but not for my direct aid plan. And so we're still cataloging and getting all of the forms from our online portal into our system. And so give us a little bit more time. We apologize for the delay. We will get you a confirmation on your forms And if we don't give you a confirmation on your forms, we'll send you an email, and you have submitted your forms, we'll send you an email or give you a notification of that, so you can just directly email it to us. And so be a little bit patient with us as you wait for those confirmations, but know that if you've submitted it on the portal, you've done your part. It's up to us now to get those forms and let you know if we have them or if we need any additional information. Let's go through some quickly some FAQs, and then Doug and I will go through the chat. I know we've got over 30 questions here pending, so we'll leave a significant amount of time for that. And so I'm not going to go through these. These were illustrated. You all can continue to look at those from the presentations. The last thing that I'll say is how, in addition to, in reference to hazard pay, it cannot be paid across the board. It has to be specifically for individuals that were responding or mitigating to COVID-19. That is the thing that I know I've said more than anything on these webinars, is the substantially dedicated to responding to the COVID-19 emergency. And I know that can be kind of a gray area phrase of how that's determined, but again, it's a reasonable determination of they are substantially dedicated to COVID-19, and that's the lens in which the Recovery Office will be viewing a lot of this stuff, because that's the language that we've been given from the federal government. And so we've always asked you all in all of your expenditures to get as close to, and as sure as possible to necessary for COVID-19 and substantially dedicated to mitigating or responding to COVID-19, because the closer we are, the safer we are in terms of a federal audit or in terms of our expenditures. And so start with your COVID-19 priorities and then determine what good services programs you need to achieve those priorities. So with that, I'm going to try to go through the chat here with Doug, and if you all have any additional questions, I know that you will. We will continue to answer those. So got some good hellos for Doug. Appreciate that. Direct spending, if we are not doing a transfer but submitting individual expenditures for counties, schools, do we have to pay vendors directly, or can we pay the school after they have ordered or paid for an item? Laura, that's a county level decision. It's up to you if you want to require them to buy it first and then pay them afterwards. You just have to illustrate it on a subsequent expenditure report. And so you can either just transfer them the money and it just depends on your county and school, right? So if they have the money to upfront the cost, and then you can just allow them to buy it first and reimburse them. But if they don't have those funds and they want a direct transfer to be able to buy things, then you can do it that way as well. Next question on the expense reimbursement sheet: would installing sneeze guards in a local government office be a reopening measure category? We should use the public health category with construction to modify. I would use the public health category with construction to modify for that one, Pam. Is there a list available for which state agencies will be responsible for different phase 2 projects with total amounts of funding available? Keith, that's a really good question. So I believe that a version of that is in the Spark presentations that we've given to the Spark committee. There's a spreadsheet that we gave to the State Finance Council that is provided as a PDF on the Spark website, that gives a full rundown of what all programs are in round 2 and what agency is associated with them. And so I would check there. If we have some time at the end, I can definitely put that in the chat so that you all have a direct link to that.
I would also just jump in, Keith. I know that we have a voicemail from you that needs responded to, so you can expect a call from me today. I recognize that name, so we'll get you contacted today.
I appreciate that. Another congratulations for Doug. There's another question here. I received confirmation that our reimbursement was received, but nothing on the direct aid plan. Jim, I apologize. I know that you all are waiting for confirmation on one of those forms. You've done what you needed to do. It's our job now. We're trying to get everything from our online portal in one place. And so give us some time here. We'll get you a response as soon as possible, as early as Monday about, or at the end of the day today, or early as Monday, about the forms that we do have. And if we don't have them, we'll send you an email and ask you to just email us the forms directly. But you've done your part. Give us a little bit of time. We apologize for the delay there. How are you sharing data from our reports, listing all the counties on a website? And so the data that we share as the Office of Recovery will be aggregate data. And so it'll say counties in general have spent $400 million, has spent $100 million on health-related investments. They've transferred over $50 million towards their schools. And so so our data that we publish will be more aggregate. Again, we encourage you all to submit and publish data on your website and for your residents, however you see fit, whether it be a summary of your direct aid plan or whether it be a summary of your expenditures. The goal here is to keep everybody informed as to how we're using taxpayer dollars to invest in different priorities for health, for economic development, and so on. And so that's how we're going to be sharing the information, and then you all can share information however you see fit. The other thing that I'll add is, in terms of how we're sharing it with the federal government, we're going to take your reports directly based on the specific expenditure categories that you've listed for all your expenditures, and then give an aggregate amount of how much has been spent at the county level as it relates to PPE or how it relates to public health. Phil, will the State Finance Council be approving any individual county plans? No. The State Finance Council does not have a role in approving the county individual plans. Only the Office of Recovery will approve those plans and get you a notification on those. Must counties wait to receive approval of plans and reimbursement prior to distributing funds? So as it currently stands, yes, you should wait for us to start transferring money out of your accounts. The reason for that is that we want to ensure that all of the expenses are provided for eligible purposes. What I will say is that as we get our consultants on board, what we're going to implement is a rolling basis. And so you will be able to start, there'll be kind of a rolling basis in terms of the lower risk, clearly eligible expenses like PPE, health-related investments, business grant programs. We'll give you an okay first so you can start implementing those, and then we'll start reviewing all of the other ones that may not be directly related, but we need some extra time to review. And so we will be providing you some flexibility as it relates to getting your program started as soon as possible. And so we'll give you those responses on a rolling basis so you can start getting money out of your account. I've been looking for a guidance checklist of items to be submitted by Monday. I'm aware of the reimbursement report and county aid plan. Anything else? No. The two things that are supposed to be submitted by Monday are the reimbursement report and the county direct aid plan. And we'll go through that here in a second so that you all have access to that. If eligible expenses under Treasury guidance are not reimbursed by a county, what will be the process for cities and schools to have county determination reviewed? That's a good question. So as we go through the process, and if there are specific investments that are eligible but are denied, we'll get back to you on that, Eric. It's a good question. I don't have a specific answer as to how all of that process is going to work. As of right now, we're encouraging counties to review and provide a determination and a process for reimbursement for the expenses, for eligible expenses for cities and schools. Obviously, if all of the funds go beyond what's even allocated, then it's not possible to provide those reimbursements, but we'll get back to you on a specific process for that. December 30th, does the project have to be completed by then? Does the money have to be expended or encumbered? What does encumbered mean? So all goods and services have to be incurred by December 30th. And so if you have a program, let's say a PPE program, for example, you have to get that PPE out to your individuals by December 30th. If you're hiring people, you can only pay them for what they do, for what services they provide up to December 30th. If you're doing a business grant program, you have to get those grants out to businesses by December 30th. And so all your programs, everything has to be implemented by December 30th. So if you're providing funds to a school, for example, they also have to buy all of their services or all of their PPE, all of their barriers, what have you, by December 30th. What are the next reports we need to file, and what are the due dates as we did in the reimbursement direct aid form? Will the new templates need to be provided, utilized? Yes, we need to provide you new templates. The reimbursement form has on the first page has a list of when you're going to have to submit your new reports. And so I know that the deadline for the next report is coming up, and so we'll provide you a new template as soon as possible. So how will counties be able to get audit assurances from educational partners that their spending will not be duplicated when they receive future educational appropriations in future rounds? So one thing that you could do is to sign some sort of MOU or sign some sort of resolution, as you've done with us, with those schools to ensure that they do so. That is the best way to ensure some responsibility at the school level. The other avenue, in addition to signing an MOU, is to have appropriate reporting requirements from that school of exactly how much money they're receiving from the federal government, so you have access to that information. But I would say the best thing to do is to sign some sort of baseline document, and you can use what we've provided for cities and other subrecipients as a template for how you develop that document. Many vendors will not allow purchases to be held for payment, so buyers will pay with their credit cards. For direct aid plan payments, are we allowed to pay buyers' credit card instead of direct pay the actual vendor? Doug, any questions? Go ahead.
I would chime in on this one and just say, if your county purchasing procedures allow that, then I think you could proceed with that. You would just want to handle it in a way typical to your county purchasing procedures.
Okay.
We don't have any particular guidance on that.
A question here from Jim. The tax question was less about what business they need to do and more about what the county needs to do for grant income tax reporting purposes. We've just decided to issue a 1099. Doug, any update on that? Or
no, I think that's
okay.
If that's appropriate for that situation, then that is absolutely what you should do.
Okay, perfect. I understood on the direct aid plan that they submit receipt documentation for this, and the county then cuts them a check for what was spent. Maybe I misunderstood, but I didn't think we paid the vendors directly. So it's up to you how you want to do it. So the point of the direct aid is for you can either require your subrecipient to pay it up front and you provide them the funds, or the point of having that kind of flexible aid was that if you don't have the money to upfront the cost, then you can just use the CRF funds to pay for it, pay the vendors directly. And so if you want to pay the vendors directly, you can do so. If you want to require them to your subrecipients to submit receipts or documentation moving forward and then pay them, you can do that as well. What are the rules on buildings? Can you build one? Can it be a permanent structure? What I will say right now, Leslie, is that if you are spending money for a building, all of the construction has to be completed by December 30th if you want to use CRF funds. And so if the construction takes beyond December 30th, then you can't use CRF funds anymore. There was a note from the Department of Treasury that only temporary buildings are allowed. And so I think in that context, they were saying you should only be doing things like a temporary drive-in testing facility, for example, and that a lot of those capital costs that are going to take a long time shouldn't be taken on by any sort of recipient of these funds. And so that's what our current understanding is. We're waiting for some additional guidance, but as of right now, we are saying if you can't complete it by December 30th, then don't do it. And the second part of that is it directly has to be related to COVID-19. And so I know that folks are thinking about a lot of renovations. It has to clearly be related to and necessary for the COVID-19 pandemic. And so continue to look at our FAQs and our presentations to understand some examples about that, but keep that in the back of your mind as you're working on these forms. Thank you. I appreciate that clarification, on the 1099. Can you copy the Department of Treasury FAQ link here to send it to the listserv? I typed the link in my browser, it didn't work. We can copy and paste it here right after we finish, so you have access to that Department of Treasury FAQ. I think there was a question. Oh, thanks, Eric. I appreciate you putting that link here, a link in there. I think there's a question about, do you need a W-9 form for each recipient?
I think so. If I were in your shoes, what I would have done a couple months ago is used a 1099. That's the way we would have handled it. But again, you need to make sure that your county counselor understands and gives you guidance on that process.
Sure. Here, question from Bruce here. Can you address the subject of a state pending plan review? Is whoever the state office reviewing the plan is going to be going line by line and reviewing each proposed expenditure? I heard a few concerns working in the plans that some of the plan expenses are not appropriate, but the decision makers that approve and submit the plans are submitting them anyway. So the way that the review will happen is it will be a line by line review of your plan. And so some expenditures are easier than others. So if you have PPE expenditures, clearly it's an allowable expense. It's going to be green light, you can go ahead. We will be going through the budgets as it relates to all of your subrecipients and the transfers. And so if there is a discrepancy where we see that in line by line that one of your subrecipients are submitting a reimbursement request that isn't allowable, then it's going to be denied. And so we will be going through those plans with the understanding that all of it has to be meeting federal requirements. And so that's why we've asked you as much as possible to allow and request that your subrecipients be detailed in what they plan to spend on, because if they're just saying, I need $400,000 for general COVID-19 expenses, that's not enough. We need to know what you're going to be spending money on, because general COVID-19 expenses can mean different things to different people. And the goal here with all of this, and I always want to touch on the why as to why we're saying certain things, is that we want to protect you all and we want to protect the fund. And so we want to ensure that we don't have to pay any money back on the back end, and that we're saving you time as you move forward here, so you know exactly what people are going to be spending money on, and that helps you manage the process a little bit more.
But I think this is also a good time to reiterate what Jay said earlier, and that is the rolling approvals, right? Just because part of your plan doesn't pass muster, that doesn't mean your whole plan goes away. We will work with you to get some of those easier ones out the door as quickly as possible.
There's a question about, would the hours of an employee attending a standing daily meeting on COVID-19 be something that would be reimbursable expense for a county, city, or school? And so so planning is an allowable expense, and so you can only reimburse them for those hours that they spent directly planning on COVID-19. And so if they spent hours directly related to COVID-19 planning, then you can reimburse them for those specific hours. Jim, I appreciate you jumping in there as well and providing an additional answer. Again, on the 1099 form, again, I would encourage you, like Doug said, to jump in with your county counselor and work with your county to determine what the best county practices are. So here's a question. I think so that they're taking a portion of the U.S. guidance, U.S. Treasury Department guidance as it relates to payroll. So, and the question is specifically related to, does the guidance allow for public safety to be reimbursed by CRF funds? So, so again, you have to be able to clearly illustrate that it is substantially dedicated to mitigating or responding to COVID-19. And so that could include public safety employees, that it could include other sorts of employees that are dedicated towards COVID-19. And so I know that some folks have reallocated their existing employees to be specifically for a COVID response, that could be an allowable expense. The whole goal of what we're saying here as it relates to payroll is to stick on the conservative side. And so if you do get an additional guidance from the federal government that said it tightens up payroll costs, that you don't have a huge portion of your direct aid plan that needs to be reallocated. Again, if you can make the determination at the county level that those individuals were substantially dedicated to COVID-19, then you can include that in your direct aid plan as an allowable payroll expense.
I think, Hannes, you're correct. The plain reading of the language does suggest exactly what you're saying, that public service employees can be reimbursed. But to Jay's point, we're anxious about this additional guidance, and we want to make sure that we all end up on the right side of this line. So be conservative, please.
The tax ID question on the grant form, again, if you can't provide that, that's okay. Please try to. I know that for the grant application form, it may be a little bit easier to get access to that number, but if you can't provide that number, that's okay as well. Just put the name of that institution or that business. Will the chat question be answered, posted somewhere? Yes, so I forgot to mention this in the beginning, but as much as possible, we are trying to post updated FAQs. So the updated FAQ as of today is up on the website, so you can go and access that. So you can definitely go in and look at that FAQ to look at some questions that were answered on Wednesday. What we do is we take the chat, we look at the questions that can be universal or weren't answered before, and we try to include those in an updated FAQ so that they might be included.
Vijay, can I jump in here a second? Because it says here that Pam, she missed the question that she was trying to get answered. Just go back and watch the video. We're going to have this posted here in a couple of minutes after the chat is over. Just go back and replay that question that she was waiting for that she missed. So that would be a faster and easier way for her to get the answer that she's looking for.
Yep. I appreciate that, Bruce.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. I think you're just responding to a separate one. Please do post the PDF you mentioned for round 2. We'll try to find that and post that in the right here in a second. So what happens if we find out that a local interpretation was not what the federal guidance says it should be? So if we provide you a response that says, hey, this is not an allowable expense when we do the state review, then you will have a chance to reallocate those funds to an eligible purpose. If we get additional federal guidance that changes the game here, we're going to have to work with all of you. And so we are continuously monitoring that. And so we'll give you some communication about what that means and we will work with you to readjust plans based on federal guidance. We understand that there's a lot of nervousness and trust me, we're nervous too about how all of this is going to work, and we appreciate your patience and partnership on that. But question here from Eric. What I've heard throughout the process is that reimbursements to counties and cities and schools is supposed to be the first priority. Our expectations would be that those reimbursements are handled first and aren't crowded out by other direct aid spending. You are correct, Eric. So because of the resolution, counties need to start with providing reimbursements to their cities and schools. And so counties should start with that and be providing the reimbursements as much as possible and clearly for eligible expenses as it relates to the city and school level. And we can touch base with you afterwards as it relates to maybe some issues that you all are having with that and work through those as well. For round 2, it means a business needs to be open by July 2019. Is there any assistance for businesses that were trying to open in the midst of COVID-19? Again, I think that may be a question for you to submit to the Department of Commerce through their Back to Business email. They have a whole host of staff dedicated to that, to answering questions right now. And so I would pose that question to Department of Commerce to see if any of their programs apply. Before you pose that question, go on the website, see if that's already addressed in the website. I'm having issues with the reimbursement spreadsheet when I try to add more additional lines for invoices. What do I need to do to correct this? So you can do one of two things, Britt. One is you can just copy the individual sheet for reimbursement expenses and then just delete all of the duplicated entries. And so that'll copy the entire sheet and you'll have a whole host of new lines to fill out here. Or you just highlight a section of what's already filled out, and then you insert a copy of all of those shells, of those lines. And so that will just copy what's already there, but you can just delete what's duplicated and then use those lines for your additional invoices. And so that's the way to ensure that the formula is continues to be applicable there. Thank you, Nelson. I appreciate that, putting the link in there. And Debbie, I appreciate you answering that as well. Looking past today, I know you all are still developing the guidance. Any sense of how plan amendments will look like, how many are allowed, how close to December 30th, what kind of change in the expenditure will be minor, not require an amendment? As we get the consultants on board, we will be giving you some additional information on how plan amendments work. We will be providing a little bit more support to you all as it relates to getting your questions answered for reporting. And so hold tight on that question. I appreciate you thinking ahead. We will, like Doug mentioned, approval is going to be on a rolling basis. So we assume that if you're approved for PPE, that you're going to be approved for PPE in perpetuity until December 30th. And so those are types of things that we're thinking about for, if it's an allowable expense, will allow you to continue there as needed. Jim, the presentation that's posted right now does include Secretary Lenz's slides. One last question here. So regarding the scope allowed in the September amendment, when our governing body was approving the plan submittal, they expressed some interest in moving some funds around a little bit more, but went ahead and improved the plan as presented. The question came up, after approval of our plan by the state, are they allowed to reallocate some funds from one bucket of recipients to another as a part of their September amendment? Is this acceptable? So I don't think we've made a specific process as it relates to a change, but as I said before, this is an evolving pandemic and priorities change. And so we will try to be as flexible as possible if you want to shift your funds to an additional source. And so we'll be giving you some information about how to do that. But as much as possible, continue to know that all of your amendments have to be eligible expenditures. So if you want to move something around as it relates to a changing priority, you'll have a chance to do that. Moving forward, what you're going to be submitting to us is an expenditure reporting sheet, right? You're going to be telling us exactly what you spent on. And so just continue to communicate with us as you think about it. And Doug, go ahead.
I would also say, JD, first of all, welcome back to Kansas. And I would say that you would want to make sure that whatever form of action your governing body passed allowed staff the flexibility to do that. You can certainly work with us to get some of that flexibility, but also make sure on the back end that you're communicating that with your governing body and that you have that ability and authority.
Perfect. Last question, Kathy, I appreciate that a question. So as of right now, just the reimbursement report and direct aid plan are due on 8/15 or 8/17 with a grace period. We will be providing you new templates as soon as possible. And so for the next round of reports, we will be giving you a new template to provide some additional information as it relates to what you're going to be spending on beyond August 1st. So I know we're over time here, but I want to honor a few requests here to just go through what's due on over the next couple of days. So, and the first thing is the direct aid plan, and I think the next slide might be a little bit easier to understand here. So the two things that are due on August 15th and a grace period until Monday the 17th are the county reimbursement reporting form and the direct aid planning form. Both are found on our website. Those are each individual spreadsheets. So they each are their own spreadsheet with multiple tabs within them. So you need to be, as much as possible, starting with the county reimbursement reporting form, figuring out all of your reimbursements for your county and your subrecipients for March 1st to July 31st, putting that in there. And then for anything that you're spending beyond August 1st, you would illustrate that in your direct aid planning form. And that direct aid planning form includes multiple tabs, whether it be for transfers, for programs, for independent expenditures. So if you're planning on giving your school district $400,000 to spend beyond August 1st, put that in your direct aid plan form. And so both of those spreadsheets are due to us by 8/15 and by 8/17 if you would like that grace period. We will be giving you some sort of confirmation for those, but if you have additional questions, look at the FAQs, look at the presentations. I appreciate all of your patience. I know we're in the home stretch here. We will give you as quick as response as possible. That is our goal, and that is the expectation that you can have of us. The last couple of things that I'll say here, and I'll post the link to that round 2 PDF before I leave, and I'll turn it over to Doug here in a second. If you want to say anything more about this section, Doug. Okay. The next webinar is going to be next Friday. We're going to do these webinars weekly from now on. And again, the next steering committee meeting is on August 19th at 10 a.m. You can view that via the governor's YouTube page. Doug, I'll let you take over here. Anything else that you'd like to?
No, so the next webinar is until next Friday, but certainly in the interim, as you have questions, comments, concerns, reach out to our general email box and recovery@ks.gov, or you could also copy me on that as well, doug.gerber@ks.gov. So we'll work to get those answers out, whatever questions and concerns you might have, as quickly as we can.
Perfect. I'm gonna, Bruce, if you want to end here while you're talking, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen and put the link to that round 2 spreadsheet that folks were asking for in the chat.
Okay. Very good. Well, if there's nothing else from the two of you, again, Doug, thank you for everything and welcome aboard. And Vijay, we cannot thank you enough for getting us as far as you have gotten us. And so we appreciate it. Look forward to continuing to work with all of you over there at the recovery office and appreciate all that you are doing day in and day out in front of the camera and behind the scenes. So, so with that, folks, don't forget that like we talked about, the links will be for this presentation. This Zoom will be posted on the website here shortly. It doesn't take very long to get them downloaded and then uploaded to YouTube and the links created. And then also, if you once again, if your name is not on our listserv and you care to be a part of that, please don't hesitate to send me an email, cladney@kansascounties.org, your name, your email address, and the county that you're working in. That way we can add you to the distribution list, and then you can communicate with your peers and find out a lot of these answers that you're asking here are getting talked about on that listserv, and so you're getting answers in real time. So not to discount what these two fine gentlemen are doing, but just know that the listserv is there 24/7, 365, and it can answer a lot of these questions as well as your peers throw in their knowledge as well. So with that, as Vijay said, our next webinar is not until Friday at 2 o'clock. So until then, if there's anything else that you two guys need from us, looks like you've got the
I
link.
posted the link to that summary, Bruce, so folks, you guys can look there. As always, all of these documents as it relates to round 2 are posted on our website under Spark meeting materials. And if you go to the State Finance Council, that's materials, that's usually where you'll see the most updated or most comprehensive materials. And so start there, but the link is here, and we appreciate all the work that you all are doing, and we'll looking forward to reviewing the plans and seeing how money is being spent for folks in your community. So we appreciate all your work. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you, guys. Thank you very much. And we'll see you all on Friday. Have a great weekend and great week next week. Take care now.